Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. This video is a review of the beautiful limited edition release from Indicator of the classic Italian Western The Big Gundown, primarily released in 1967 and of course directed by Sergio Sollima, the first of his three classic Italian Westerns and the start of the Thomas Milian character of Cucilio, who would be reprised in the quasi-sequel to this film, Run Man Run, which was the third and final of Sollima's Westerns. This is a fantastic Italian Western and one of the great ones to look at if you're just getting into Italian Westerns outside of the iconic Sergio Leone Westerns, which really sort of jump-started the genre. And of course, the bulk of Italian Westerns are always having to deal with being in the shadow of the Leone films, especially when you have a lot of other key cast and crew members appear as they do here. Of course, our star is Lee Van Cleef, along with Thomas Milian in the secondary role of Cucilio, and even the dynamic between the two characters is reminiscent between the dynamic between Blondie and Tuco and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or even in ways reminiscent of the Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef dynamic in For a Few Dollars More. And as with Leone's films and all Italian Westerns, and especially what Sollima does here in The Big Gundown, they are very much showing their love and admiration and respect for classic American and Hollywood Westerns, because that idea of the two-man dynamic constantly squaring off against each other and sort of having a never-ending back and forth is very largely inspired by Vera Cruz from 1954 between Gary Cooper and Burt Lancaster, and that incredible Robert Aldrich film, which for my money is basically the first Italian Western in terms of its approach and its enormous influence on Leone and most people making Italian Westerns. So ultimately, this film, like all the great Italian Westerns and the Leone masterpieces, remains a fascinating film to look at, not just for being a great Italian Western and just a great film, but it's really going to have so many additional layers for fans of the genre and for fans who have a good appreciation and knowledge of not just the Italian Westerns, but the original Hollywood Westerns that so deeply inspired everyone who started trying to make Westerns of their own. So you can't really look at Italian Westerns without becoming more enraptured by American Westerns and the whole adoration of the genre that was had by Italian filmmakers, and of course other European filmmakers as well. It'll rub off on you, and so the more experience you have with classic American Westerns, the more it reads into your experience with the Italian Westerns. And similarly, like a lot of Italian Westerns, The Big Gundown had a variety of release edits, so in that sense it shared a similar fate to the Leone films, which are still kind of a mess of different edits and video presentations. So to have a release as we have here on the Indicator version, which has 3 different presentations of cuts of the film, including the complete uncut Italian original release version with multiple different audio options for all the different dubs, is really important because this film in particular was drastically cut down for its US release and of course retitled a more generic title in The Big Gundown, as opposed to the original La Resa del Conti, which of course it translates to The Settling of Accounts, which is a much better title, and itself was one of the soundtrack cue titles on Ennio Morricone's score for a Few Dollars More. So you're not going to escape the Leone parallels. But this film was not really even available on major US video releases until a newer 2K master was done, seemingly by Sony, because that's who it's credited to. And we got the Grindhouse releasing Blu-ray here in the US a number of years ago. And so now this is essentially Indicator taking their own crack at handling this film in this 2K master source. But they've gone even beyond what the Grindhousing release did and offer even more options, more audio options, and substantially more supplements in the beautiful limited edition package. So this is by far the most love and attention this film has gotten on home video. It is building off of the previous releases efforts and using the same Sony 2K master. So obviously it would benefit if Sony eventually revisited this film with a 4K scan, as we saw them do finally with the landmark, iconic Bud Bedecker, Randolph Scott masterpiece westerns, which previously some did get 2K scan preservation elements like what we see here. So there is still a little bit of wear and such in terms of what you see here, as it's already a couple years old now. But this is certainly even more impressively handled than it was on the US Blu-ray, which itself was the only decent video release this film had ever gotten. And then, of course, in between the two, there was a German Blu-ray release as well, which I think was working from the same master. So thankfully, this is one of the Italian Westerns you can actually look at on a Blu-ray release and actually be able to see it in its complete form and have options of other cuts, alternate audio options. You can view this in both the original Italian mono and the English mono dub, which is important because, of course, you have Lee Van Cleef voicing himself, and I think that's always really important when you have the actual original actor actually doing the dub. But Italian Westerns do need to have their alternate audio options preserved because they were each unique, and some are actually better than the English dub or have differences or unique aspects to them. But this is one of the few Italian Westerns where there are proper options to be able to view the film in its entirety and have a nice amount of supplements and not have any major transfer problems, no issues with color timing, no video transfer problems, and no issues with the overall edit. So that's not an easy thing to do, and anyone who is a fan of Italian Westerns will tell you that it's easier said than done to have a proper video release without major errors that also, has some nice supplements and things as well. And this, unfortunately, is something that's the two follow-ups that Sollima did. His other two Westerns suffer from issues on their more modern releases. They don't have the greatest release history in the world. And for example, Face to Face, which was the second Western he would make, also again with Thomas Milian, that film is stuck in high definition in its edited cut down version. And the original Italian version on the Kino release is a very poor standard def copy treated as an extra. So that film still definitely needs work. And Run Man Run finally got a new scan and has a lovely Eureka Blu-ray, but they had to go in and recolor the master themselves because unfortunately it had passed through the hands of the terrible color department at L'Immagine Ritrovata in Italy, who is the same group responsible for all the horrible color grades applied to the scans of Leone films, among many others, and have done great damage to every master they've applied this revisionist color grading to. So Eureka did the best they could, but unfortunately that release is still compromised because they're trying to combat that terrible color timing, but it's still kind of baked in there. So at least that film fares okay, but even that has issues. So again, it's even hard on a new release from a new master to get an Italian Western completely okay in picture and sound and edit and have nice supplements, and not have something be screwed up somewhere. So finally having the Big Gundown now and even more deluxe indicator release is really something special. And again, if you're newer to the world of Italian Westerns or you've never ventured outside of the Leone canon, this would be a great film to start with because it is one of the best non-Leone Westerns, and there's definitely a case to be made for with his three Westerns for Sergio Sollima as one of the other truly great directors of Italian Westerns, alongside Leone, of course, at the top, and then Sergio Corbucci and others. So these are definitely not your typical run-of-the-mill Italian Western that was cranked out on a sort of assembly line during the Italian Western boom. These are very much above average, and the Big Gundown is fascinating because in ways it is trying to stand on its own apart from the sort of glut of Italian Westerns that had come out. There is a sense, and it's discussed in the extras as well, and Sergio Sollima admitted that he wanted to, of course, have a very political aspect to the story and the main themes, which translate perfectly into the Western genre. So, of course, this is a film that is very much discussing a lot of ideals and concepts and things that were currently then going on in the Italian politics of the time. And most Italian Westerns would start to deal with this around this point, and I think you could definitely make the case that there's a whole subgenre of Italian westerns that are basically political westerns, and different people would take different approaches. Eventually, Leone himself would dabble in this with Once Upon a Time in the West, and especially in Duck-You-Sucker most of all. But also, Sollima is trying to distance The Big Gundown from being overly violent and gritty and dark and nasty as the vast majority of Italian westerns were becoming, and only increasing. So there's a sense of almost trying to have at least in areas touches or elements of the more classical Hollywood Western. And it's very obvious that just like Leone, Sollima was a great fan and admirer of American Westerns. I think most every great Italian Western director was a great fan of Hollywood Westerns. I think it's pretty much impossible to have a great Italian Western without having a director who was obsessed with American Westerns. The Leone connections are first and foremost in the credits when you start looking at it. Of course, this is being made around the same time as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and would see its international and major releases just slightly after. So that's why in the US promotional materials, Columbia tried to market the film as having Lee Van Cleef starring as Mr. Ugly, which is, of course, rather funny because that wasn't even his correct character designation in the English language dub of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But it is very much obviously trying to be marketed off the back of the success of the Dollars trilogy of Leone's films that have been so successful. And there are elements of Lee Van Cleef's character of Jonathan Corbett in this film that are very much stemming from what we see in both For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And most of Lee Van Cleef's Italian westerns, after he became a star overnight and For a Few Dollars More, are usually pulling from either of those two films, usually For a Few Dollars More. So you usually see a lot of Colonel Mortimer, especially in The Wardrobe. You see that a little bit here, and also, of course, in the Sabata films, where they really tried to play on that image. But it's even in Death Rides a Horse. So every Lee Van Cleef starring film role after his Leone films is always sort of using that iconography, and you do get a degree of that here. But also, the film was produced by Alberto Grimaldi, who had produced For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and was the one who gave Sollima the chance to make this as a Western, and was a gigantic help to the Italian film industry, particularly in the field of Italian Westerns. And really, without Grimaldi, even Leone would not have had the successes that he had, because it was his partnering with Grimaldi on For a Few Dollars More that really allowed him to be more artistically free and not have all of the incredible production difficulties that he had with Jolly Film and all the other not so helpful, shall we say, producers on A Fistful of Dollars, which was also a very threadbare budget. And then you have the whole situation of people not bothering to get the rights for remaking Yojimbo and the whole mess that caused. So it was very much Leone partnering with Grimaldi on For a Few Dollars More that allowed his career to flourish, and it is Grimaldi who you will find behind a great number of the most important and iconic Italian westerns. Of course, like the Leone films and most other Italian westerns, the films are going to be primarily shot in and around Almeria in Spain, and feature a lot of the same familiar faces on both sides of the camera, and be shot in the Techniscope format, which provides some incredible opportunities for visuals. But interestingly, here as well, Sollima kind of strikes out on his own and manages to create a sort of unique visual style. It's very nice to see somebody utilizing the abilities of Techniscope to give you a scope aspect ratio, but also use spherical lenses so you can get closer to your actors or make really nice shots of the vistas and long shots, and use the landscape. But he's not trying to copy what Leone did. I think he was very conscious about trying to avoid that wherever possible. So I do think that, as others have said, that in the Sollima westerns, there's a unique voice there, and they do sort of fit into a loose trilogy, especially since the third film sort of reprises a version of the same Thomas Millian character introduced here. But in terms of the plot, it's actually It's relatively simple when you look at it, because the Big Gundown revolves around Jonathan Corbett, played by Lee Van Cleef, who is a famous bounty hunter, sort of figure of law enforcement of sorts, because he sort of operates outside the system, but is shown to be the best bounty hunter or tracker in the territories. And he is put onto a case, essentially, of trying to track down a Mexican character of Cuchillo, who is the Thomas Milian character, who has been accused of brutally raping and murdering a young girl. And this is a case he's put onto by the wealthy land baron, who has great desires to bring the railroad into town, and doesn't want any sort of elements stirred up. There are, of course, questions in the back of the audience's mind, just as there are questions in the back of Corbett's mind, and this allows for many, many, many incredibly phenomenal Lee Van Cleef close-ups where we just get volumes spoken by his reaction shots and just his magnificent eyes and the way that he could just hold a camera's gaze without even having to say a word of dialogue. But once Corbett starts to actually track Cuchillo, it becomes very clear that this character is not someone to be trifled with, even though he is a very much salt of the earth type character. He is a very smart, very wily, and exceptionally difficult to pin down character. So the film then becomes more episodic in its structure, and it basically becomes a continual back and forth game of one-upsmanship between the two. And it's fascinating to see the two characters be played by actors with completely different styles. Thomas Milian is very much of the actor studio mentality and is just a ball of energy, and that contrasts very well with Lee Van Cleef, as it was always famously said, looking as if his eyes are burning holes through the actual film itself every time he has a close-up, because that's legitimately the effect of every time he's on screen. But there's a nice interplay between the two, and their styles are so completely different that it then fits in with the story, that over time both the audience and the Corbett character start to question if the Cuchillo character actually committed the crimes he was accused of. So it then becomes more about themes of potential corruption, of course, and the highest and, shall we say, most money-driven sections of society in the West, which is, of course, a great theme for any Western. But it is very much an episodic film. It is a film that basically has continual sequences as the chase goes on, and Corbett has moments where he will capture Cuchillo, and then it's Cuchillo's ability to sort of worm his way out of it and display this incredible ingenuity and lust for life that makes him a likable character. And interestingly, again, we have this question of Cuchillo's possible innocence that starts to come up, but for the longest time, that's not even necessarily a question in everybody's mind. So it's fascinating how Sollima and the actual film is trying to get the audience to more freely associate with a character who is seemingly a just absolutely despicable human being, and playing around with that concept of someone who can do terrible things but yet still be unbelievably charming as well. I think two of the greatest aspects of this film's effectiveness are two other sort of holdovers from the main Leone names, and that, of course, would be number one, Ennio Morricone contributes an incredible score for this film with an absolutely staggeringly powerful main title theme, which will stick with you and is accompanied by a really effective opening title sequence, which is, again, reminiscent of the Lardani titles for, say, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But Morricone's score is phenomenal. There are some flourishes or moments that are reminiscent of his work for Leone, but this very much is a score that has its own identity that does fit the film perfectly. So this is another of one of Morricone's iconic Western scores, and just doesn't unfortunately get discussed as much as the more famous ones, but it's definitely definitely one of his most highly regarded scores for any of the westerns he would actually compose for. The other, and I think probably the most important person outside of Sollima in terms of the effectiveness of this film, is Sergio Donati. The script was co-written by Donati with Sergio Sollima, and Donati's contributions have always, I think, been extremely underrated in terms of just the Leone films alone. But all of Donati's screenwriting work in terms of the Italian westerns, specifically the Leone films, and this kind of filters into the others, he had a remarkable way to work in a sense of the sardonic, morbid, dark humor that we associate with the Leone films and a lot of Italian westerns. And he could also work with satire and even the political elements that Sollima was after, and that were also part of the original source story that this film was based on. And that source story was even darker. So they did tweak and change the ending, and also try to bring it a little bit more in line with being a not Hollywood Western, but at least more of a traditional Western enjoyable experience that still has political themes scattered throughout that do make you think and ask a lot of important questions, but not overdoing it to cut down on the entertainment factor, essentially. But it's Donati being the primary screenwriter here that I think makes this material work, because I think some other Italian westerns that are very obviously politically minded, they're not always necessarily the most enjoyable films to watch. They don't quite have as much of at least a sparkle or a sense of energy or some wit or some fun to them that make them more enjoyable to watch and return to. And it's like with anything, that if it's more obviously serious, it can be a bit heavy-handed or be a bit slower feeling because there's just so much to digest. So I think it's Donati who keeps the pace kind of moving. And there's so much of this film that is unfortunately only in the Italian version, and this was mostly removed from the US edit, but some still survives. But there's so much in this film that is blisteringly funny in terms of just really darkly tinged wit that's full of societal commentary, and also insight into the differences in class structure in the West, and of course the differences between American towns and how society existed in Mexico as it's usually depicted in a Western. So it's really, I think, if the film had a secret weapon, it's Donati's writing, and I think that's a great sort of secret weapon element that's in a lot of Italian Westerns, even the Leone films. And I think you can always tell when, in terms of just the actual dialogue and the wittiness of a film in an Italian Western. I think you can tell, if you don't see the credits, I think you can still tell which ones had Sergio Donati writing them or Donati contributions. So I think he's a particular voice that is not championed enough, and his fingerprints are all over this film. So this is a film that will continually make an audience laugh in a good way at just the biting humor. So there's just the wonderful sort of biting, darkly tinged humor throughout the film. And some of the best moments are when it's the Corbett character himself who's kind of the butt of the joke. So this is one of the films where the supposedly strong, perfect, almost seemingly superhuman character, who's played by Lee Van Cleef, has to be brought down several pegs. You know, he has to have his holes poked in that perfection, and you can see Milian's performance as Cucilio finding enjoyment. At least, you know, he's being hunted to death by this guy, but he's at least gonna get to have some fun poking holes in that armor and trying to show Corbett himself that Corbett is not as perfect as he might think he is, or as high and mighty as he might think he is. So this becomes a continual theme as well, and also nicely plays off against a lot of the other side characters we meet in the film. In spite of the episodic nature, the actual these other side characters, from the big business magnate played by Walter Barnes to the incredibly fascinating and striking and very much, very obviously von Stroheim influenced Baron, who's the sort of hired gun of the big business magnate. There's an additional level of development and focus on all of the side characters. They each have their own quirks. Some are even just in one sequence or one scene and never reappear again. But that's why I think you remember certain sequences in this film, such as the entire sequence that takes place at a farmhouse run by a widow who runs this ranch, and she basically has full control over an entire group of guys that she keeps under her thumb. And it's just a bizarrely striking sort of very unexpected scenario to find in a Western, and that in and of itself could be a whole film. There's another scene where Corbett has been tracking Cuchillo and stops at a monastery in the middle of nowhere and finds Cuchillo's been there, but sees that Cuchillo's rubbed off on even the monks a little bit. And there's this phenomenal conversation Corbett has with one of the head monks who's been there for years, who reveals that he himself was a former gunfighter, bounty killer, and gave up the life, but that the life never quite goes away. And that is a film in and of itself as well. So there's loads of little moments and set pieces like that that keep you entertained and invested, and honestly keep you surprised. And that really helps to keep that investment factor going. So again, I think there's a certain energy and a certain wit that is all due to Sergio Donati's contributions. And I think that helps because the film is still episodic after we get the whole setup. And watching the longer Italian version, it does feel maybe that it's a bit too long, but it's also one of those films that if you think about it from an editing standpoint, and you look at the dramatically cut down US versions, which have little deletions and trims all over, but are basically reducing a film that's an hour and 50 minutes to, 85 to 89 minutes in the primary 1967 US cut down version. It's fascinating to study what was done, but they basically just took the Italian version and just tried to cut it down for time, and also tried to remove anything that might be considered a bit out there. So out went most of the political subtext, out went almost all the character beats. They just tried to make it as simplistic and streamlined as possible. So you lose so much of the texture of this film that if you've only seen the US version, you need to see the Italian version, because getting that experience, I think, will drastically change your opinion of the film if you've only seen it in the dramatically shortened and completely watered down US version. And in terms of the film having very unique aspects to it, I think the one everyone remembers most is the first of the final duels, as most Italian Westerns like the Leone films build to the final sort of perfectly staged duel and stare down. In this film, you have the what I think is iconic in genre circles, duel between gun and knife, because Cuchillo does not use guns and only uses a knife, as that's what his character is used to, and he doesn't like guns. He doesn't use them. So you get the traditional final duel stare down, but one guy has a knife instead of a gun, and it's just a fascinating visual that it makes you wonder why more films have not played around with tweaking the concept in terms of changing the weaponry up more often. And that is, I think, the element that people remember most as being very much unique and very different to other Westerns in regards to the most strikingly different and original elements of The Big Gundown. It certainly remains one of the best non-Leone Italian Westerns that I've seen, and it's phenomenal that we're able to look at the full Italian version, because I think this is one of the Italian Westerns that, while I can understand it needing maybe a little trimming here and there, because I do think the pacing does start to lag a little here and there in the full Italian version, I think it needs to be seen in its complete form to get the full effect, because unfortunately the way it was edited by Columbia in the US was not in the way that United Artists edited down the Leone films in the 60s. Those did have some scenes that were very important removed, but they also had some input from Leone himself, and nothing they did really harmed any of the actual storyline or the character arcs or the tone of the film. Well, with this film, Columbia just started chopping stuff everywhere. So if you compare the two, especially if you see the Italian version for the first time and you've never seen the film before, and then you go look at the US release edit, you're just going to be like, whoa, because there's just little tiny pieces and deletions everywhere. Again, it seems like they were mostly trying to cut it down for time or potentially to go on a double bill as well. And Columbia had a long history of picking up European films and chopping them down significantly, even reordering scenes to accommodate their release standards or putting them on a double bill. They even did this to the masterpiece Night of the Demon as the US Curse of the Demon release. So it's always important to look at films that were picked up by Columbia, because they at times did significantly alter them. Here in the Big Gundown, it's mostly large deletions and a large amount of very small deletions as well, but these do dramatically affect the overall character arcs, the overall impact of the film, and tries to make it as generic and simplified as possible. Honestly, as if they were trying to make it look like a traditional American B Western, or even more like a standard television American Western episode. So it's phenomenal that we now have this Indicator limited edition version to look at even more supplements and an even grander presentation of the film than the already lovely Blu-ray we had here in the US, and again, the German Blu-ray as well. It is working from the same Sony 2K preservation master, and this film did apparently have a lot of element issues over the years, and this Columbia in the past didn't even bother making US home video releases. So to discuss the picture quality, we do have three versions of the film. We have the original full-length Italian version, we have the original US theatrical release version, which was cut down to about 85 minutes. That's presented on disc 2 by itself. But interestingly, we also have the slightly extended US version, as it's termed. And this was done a number of years ago, and what it does is essentially take the English monodub and the original US release version, and it adds back in some of the handful of additional scenes from the Italian version that were actually done as part of the original dubbing session. And this was primarily used, I think, for broadcast on television and such. So this is a sort of in-between version, and if you are going to watch either of the shorter versions, it should be this extended US version, because it at least puts back some very important material that was removed from the US theatrical cut. Now, in terms of the dubbing, this means, of course, that not all of the original footage from the Italian version was dubbed. Frequently, when the English dub sessions happened, it was significantly after the fact, in terms of after the production had wrapped. Of course, sometimes it was not even done in Italy. It would frequently be done in New York, for example, or just wherever the sessions were to take place. And they would only usually be dubbing the scenes that were in the English language cut that had been made. So they wouldn't actually go and dub all of the scenes from the original Italian version. This is the same thing that happened on the Leone films, and why the original English dub only exists for the scenes in the international cut from 1967. And this goes for pretty much all Italian films that had longer versions or more footage. It just wouldn't, unfortunately, be dubbed in the original dub sessions, and thus you are stuck having to try to either recreate a new English dub for those scenes, or you have to mix and match between the English and Italian options, which is what Indicator opted for here, and is definitely the way to go, as opposed to, say, for example, the Sonic Atrocity that MGM created with their 2003 5.1 remix of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and a new English dub for the Italian sections that was clearly brand new and very much out of place and made that terrible audio remix even worse. So, whichever cut you choose, it is still going to be based off of this same Sony 2K Master, which has basically been conformed to the 3 different presentations. So, it's all the same base master, and it was done obviously a number of years ago, seemingly around, I'd say, 2010 to 2012, probably. It still looks fantastic, but it is, starting to show its age and obviously will not compare to a more modern 4K master. Again, I make the comparison of if you look at the indicator Blu-ray releases of the Randolph Scott Bud Bedecker Westerns, or what's also called the Renown cycle, some of those, like Ride Lonesome, got brand new 2K masters from Sony at that time, which were big improvements over the old HD masters, but then have now seen a new 4K master and restoration on the UHDs in the Criterion set that just came out last year. And that was a big improvement even over the lovely Sony 2K masters, which were starting to show their age. So again, if the Big Gundown was revisited by Sony and they did a new 4K master, it could look even better. But for what we have here, this is still a fantastic looking presentation, even though, again, it's an older master, and you do need to expect some occasional bits of wear and damage. They are very minor, but occasionally you might see a speck or a light scratch here or there, and there's one tiny spot where I noticed a little tiny hair poking in, but I think that was probably in the original photography. But obviously, if it was revisited by Sony as a brand new 4K master, it would be even better resolved and handled, as we saw on the iconic Bedecker Scott Westerns. So essentially, this is a Sony 2K preservation master with some cleanup applied. But again, every once in a while, you're going to see a little bit of just a tiny amount of frame movement, maybe just a slight amount of fluctuation in the image brightness levels here and there. Just things that are going to be inherent to the source element. And I know elements were a big problem for this film because I've read reports over the years that there just wasn't anything that survived of the US release version that was in acceptable quality, and there were no past video releases, which is always a big indicator that if a studio doesn't even have anything they can just scan back in the old days of video, then there's probably not really anything they have that's usable. So, of course, you also have to then do a search for Italian vault elements as well and have cooperation between the US studio rights holders and the Italian studio rights holders. There's also every once in a while a little bit of differences in the overall image quality. There are some shots and moments that are grainier. They may have had to mix and match some different elements. I'm sure they probably did for certain segments. And again, that's not uncommon for a film being an Italian Western to have stuff like that inherent to the original source photography, but also to the various attempts at restoration and video releases over the years. I will say, though, that overall this is a very healthy looking master. It's one of the best visual presentations of an Italian Western on a Blu-ray release because there hasn't been any manipulation of the color timing, which is fantastic to see after years of us having to look at some absolutely appalling color treatments to some of these iconic films. And obviously the most notable being the terribly color graded 4K masters of the Leone classics. So it's fantastic when we can get a preservation master like this without any sort of color manipulation. So thankfully that is not an issue here. My main issue is that this is an older Sony 2K master that's starting to show its age, and after seeing what some of their more recent 4K masters can do, even for classic Westerns that had good 2K masters like this, now it just makes me start to really, it gets my mouth salivating at the thought of, oh gosh, what if Sony did a 4K master of the Big Gundown? This could be even better. But still, this is, easily the best the film has ever been, and really the only option we have. And it's fantastic that we have this Sony 2K master with all 3 different cuts of the film. But again, if you are watching this film for the first time, you should definitely view it as the original full Italian version, and then look at the US cuts for later viewings, I would say. In terms of the disc encoding, this was handled by the wonderful folks at Fidelity in Motion, and amazingly, they were able to encode the full Italian version, the extended US version, and all of the supplements on a single Blu-ray disc. So that I was astonished because I thought most of the extras would be on disc 2, which only contains the US theatrical cut. So disc 2 is just the theatrical cut by itself. Everything else is on disc 1, and I mean, there's a reason why they're regarded as just about the best in the business at disc encoding, and I think this is a prime example because if anybody else tried to get all of this material in two different versions of a film with multiple audio options and all the supplements on a single Blu-ray disc, it would, if it was one of the major studios doing it, it'd be a freaking nightmare in terms of compression hell. So again, this is a prime example of Fidelity in Motion really leading the charge on proper disc mastering. Now we turn to the audio, which presents both the English and Italian mono mixes in lossless quality. Now, the English dub, of course, will be of limited quality as it was a 1960s English dub and dubbing over the Italian source audio. So obviously, you do need to expect the limited source quality of it being a 1960s Italian Western anyway. And then the Italian mono is of similar fidelity because it itself is a 1960s Italian Western dub. But what's fascinating and something that I wish would be done more often with these films that have the significantly longer Italian version with an incomplete English dub for those scenes, Indicator took the time to also create essentially a hybrid viewing option because this release allows you to watch the full-length Italian version with the English mono. And what it does is for any scene or bit of material that was not dubbed in the original English recording sessions, it reverts to the Italian mono with subtitles. And this is done about the best I've ever seen it on a disc release, which it's a very rare thing because it takes a lot of work to construct a hybrid track and turn subtitles on and off internally in terms of your disc authoring. So I know this took somebody quite a bit of time to sit down and do, and their efforts are certainly to be applauded because I think this is actually the best method of watching the film. It might be jarring to some people to switch back and forth between English and Italian with subtitles, but it's really seamlessly done. You very much quickly forget about reading subtitles and going back to English and back and forth. And it's also highlighting all the little tiny deletions that Columbia made back in 1967. And it really underscores how this starts to affect character because it's right there in the opening scene, which is far more complex, nuanced, and detailed, and gives you so much more information about the Corbett character. And all of this is stripped out and removed from the US version. So I think this is also a great tool to examine what the original edit did to the film and the character arcs and the overall impact of the film. But it's really well done. The only thing you might notice is obviously there is usually a little bit of difference in the noise floor between the two dubs. But even that, I think, has been handled about as best as you can do. And it's something I wish would happen more for Italian Westerns where we have the full Italian version, because the Italian mono is really good and the performances are good. And there's a certain sort of almost an extra feeling of cynicism in the line deliveries of a lot of the Italian mono that's not necessarily there in the English mono. But the Italian mono doesn't have Lee Van Cleef's voice, and that's a major thing. So I would like to watch the film in the full Italian mono, but I would still be missing Lee Van Cleef's voice the whole time. So having this option, I think, is fantastic. Now, with all of these, they are, of course, coming from the same preservation master source. They are of limited quality in terms of them being 1960s dubs of 1960s Italian Westerns, so they will sound obviously a little bit thin. They have obviously been post-synchronized because Italian films were shot silently, and the entire soundtrack had to be created afterwards. And also, you will notice that there is a little bit of harshness in the upper ranges when the music cues get a bit loud, and there's usually a little bit of tiny high-end distortion in the loudest music cue passages, but that's common to these films and common to this era anyway, so there's always going to be some degree of that. So to move on to the packaging and extras, this is the Indicator limited edition hard case box. Unfortunately, this has sold out, but they are reissuing the film in their typical standard edition, which has the same art, the same amazing discs, all the supplemental features, but unfortunately you do lose the lovely limited edition hard case box, the wonderful book, which is quite extensive, and the posters. So Indicator's limited editions are very much worth picking up. the sooner the better, because once they sell out, even though you get the same wonderful discs, you do miss out on all the wonderful packaging efforts and the incredible books that they put together. So this is done like their other single film box sets. We have the little sort of J card with the information, and then on the back we also have the credits and the number, because this was limited to 5,000. One note that I'll mention is on certain indicator releases, very few, but this is unfortunately one of them, the actual sticker, the clear sticker that holds the J card on the back of the box, it is very, very sticky. Like the adhesive is different, so it does leave some residue, so you do have to be very careful when you remove that on this particular release. And I've noticed other people said the same thing, so I just wanted to highlight that. This is one of those where you just have to be a little bit more careful than you usually are removing the sticker for the J card. So here we have the box itself, and then the lovely indicator spine with spine number. Here we have the case with the same amazing original art rendering, spine and rear. Inside, we have the 2 discs. Again, everything, including the full Italian version and the extended US cut and all the supplements, are on disc 1. And then disc 2 has the short US theatrical version. And then also the limited edition has nice reversible art with an alternative US poster. Then we have the book, which runs about 80 pages, done in Indicator's wonderful style. They make the absolute best printed material books in all of physical media, and this is no exception. So same lovely spine design, but this is loaded with lovely images, brand new and historical essays and vintage newspaper articles, interviews with the cast and crew. Nobody goes to this level of really getting into the context of a film, its production, and basically trying to give you a sense of the world in which it was made, and so much more biographical and background information about the various cast and crew members. So there is a great deal of discussion about the film's production, its history, the Italian political status at the time, and how that influenced the concepts the story was playing with, and the screenplay adaptation, and also its connection to the Leone films. And fascinatingly, there's even a concluding section discussing the rather humorous U.S. promotional campaign materials and how the film was advertised or told to be sold by U.S. theaters. And then we have an entire section on Italian Westerns as political parables, which is very helpful for understanding this sort of entire secondary genre within Italian Westerns. And what's really great about this is that this entire book gives you a better context for what makes the Sollima Westerns stand out so much and have a bit of a unique flavor, but also where they fit into other Italian Westerns and the connections with the Leone films. And then, as always, Indicator includes a photo of the director on the back, which is one of my favorite aspects of all of their books. Then we also have a beautiful poster reproduction of the artwork used for the cover, which is double-sided with the alternative US poster. These are on a nice thicker paper, and as always, the printing is excellent on the Indicator posters, so these are very much display pieces, very frameable, and even have a more premium feel than what we typically see in poster reproductions in physical media releases. And then we turn to the extras, which of course, being Indicator and this being a big deluxe limited edition, are substantial. Now, some of these are drawing from past releases, so it is mostly older legacy interviews, but Indicator has commissioned a few new extras from really great critics talking further about the film and the political context and the production background. So this is an absolutely stuffed Indicator release, as are almost all Indicator releases, so that kind of goes without saying. So to go over these, we have the Sony 2K Restoration Master with 3 presentations of the film, the full Italian version, the extended US cut, and the US theatrical cut. And of course, those run 111 minutes for the Italian, 95 minutes for the extended US version, and then 89 minutes for the theatrical US version. We have the original Italian and English mono tracks, and then we have a brand new commentary for the film, which is by Barry Forshaw with Kim Newman. It's another of their great tracks. They've done a number of tracks for Italian Westerns and even the other Sollima films. And of course, both are no stranger to any cinephile with a growing physical media collection who's also an extras junkie. So this is a great discussion of the film. It's a really nice, energetic commentary, which will help give you new insights into the film and the other Sollima Westerns and where they sort of stand in and among the most beloved and most well-respected Italian Westerns. And they do make a case as well for Sollima needing to have greater recognition as one of the great Italian Western directors under, with Sergio Leone always being on the top and sort of, casting a shadow that everybody else is in, but he definitely belongs on that list. And it's a great commentary. It's also backed with the pre-existing commentary for the U.S. long version. This was done by C. Courtney Joyner and Henry Park a number of years ago. It was on the U.S. Blu-ray, so this has been thankfully ported over here. It's also interesting that they commented on a different cut of the film, so it's obviously a little bit shorter. They do cover some of the same ground that the other commentary does, but that it's really more just mentioning the generalities. But it's also another great commentary that will give you further information and viewpoints about the film, and that it is still very much an underrated Italian Western that ranks very near the top of all the non-Leone Italian Westerns and deserves greater recognition and respect. So we have not one, but two fantastic commentaries on this release. But just keep in mind, the second commentary is for the US extended version. So you will be looking at a different cut of the film for commentary 2. Then we have the 52-minute documentary entitled Spaghetti Western Memories, which is basically an extended long-form interview edited together with both, first with Sergio Sollima and then with Thomas Milian, and they're sort of intercut a little bit. They are both extremely fascinating interviews, very forthcoming, and were done apparently for an older German video release of the film. So it's from sometime in the early to mid 2000s, it seems, but it's fantastic. Indicator was able to get this because the interviews themselves are priceless. And it's so fascinating to watch that before you know it, the whole hour's, passed and you're like, oh, wait, it's over? Oh, okay. So these are absolutely priceless, and it's phenomenal that they're here. And I especially loved being able to get that, from the horse's mouth, direct first-person perspective, especially from Sollima, who is just a fascinating figure. And the more you read about the production of this film, the more you're impressed with his work and his viewpoints. So I just thought it was fascinating being able to get such an extended long-form interview with the director himself. Then we have another piece entitled Thomas Milian Acting on Instinct. This is another interview with Milian done a number of years later and runs 30 minutes, so you get even more remembrances and insights into his acting approach and how he basically got himself into the Italian film industry. And he has a very interesting sort of life journey as, being Cuban and then going through the actor studio in New York and then becoming a star in Italy in terms of the Italian film industry. So that in and of itself is a very interesting career trajectory, and we get that reflected in another nice lengthy interview. Then in terms of the new supplements indicator commission for this release, we have two pieces from Stephen Thrower. One is entitled Prelude to a Gundown, which is specifically Thrower talking about Sollima and the cast and crew. And then the second piece is entitled Heroes and Villains, and this is Thrower continuing for 30 minutes or so about the political themes of the film. So basically, if you combine these two, it's about, 40 to 45 minutes of critical appreciation and discussion about the overall production and the context of the time in which it was made, and particularly discussing more of the Italian film industry and the state of politics in Italy at the time and how that was affecting the Italian film industry is extraordinarily helpful for understanding where people's heads were at in making this film and some of the themes that they were trying to work in and maintain in the film, and also the changes they made from the original short story, which again was much darker and ended in a completely different fashion. So this is a incredibly important supplement for watching after the film to understand the themes it's working with and the overall context in which it was made. And if you were curious about how this film really works within the other Italian Westerns of the time, we have a 23-minute piece entitled A Settling of Accounts, which is author and critic Austin Fisher talking about the Big Gundown specifically, and where it fits in terms of the entire Italian Western genre, and where it was at that point in 1966, 1967, and how the Big Gundown is coming out right on the heels of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly having massive success globally, and how that really exploded Italian westerns into more of a global box office, and more U.S. studios started to come and try to do film pickups and buy up these Italian westerns to then be able to remarket and sell in U.S. territories, which is why Columbia came in and purchased the rights to this film and released it as The Big Gundown after United Artists had so much success with the Leone films. So this is another essential, fantastic extra because it gives you more of the sense of where this film is coming out in the Italian Western boom, and how successful was it, and what resonated and what maybe didn't, and how did it stack up against other films at the same time, and then how does this lead into Sollima's other two westerns, and Run Man Run being sort of a quasi sequel to this film, because we have Thomas Milian basically playing the same character who's just modulated a little bit differently. We then get two of the original US trailers for the film. They are both in scope, they are both HD, and they look fantastic. And of course, we'll show very quickly how Columbia tried to sell the film as a straight ahead, shoot 'em up, plain Western. And of course, it's great that we actually have these because it preserves how the U.S. marketing campaign was, and very clearly shows that the first thing they did was chop out any of the harder hitting material. But also, it's great that we have these in HD, because very rarely are trailers preserved by studios or ever even scanned in HD. So to have any sort of HD trailer, let alone in its original scope form that looks halfway decent with the original vintage text on the screen and all of the marketing materials, is fantastic because it so rarely happens these days. So we have not one but two trailers. The trailers themselves are pretty much identical. It's just that the ad copy and the text has been tweaked a little bit differently. So if you look at these, you can compare the two different approaches that are just slight variations on each other in terms of the marketing. We also get the Italian trailer, which is also in scope nicely, but unfortunately they had to source an old standard def file, so that's being upscaled and obviously has some noise and things. But it's great that we do have the inclusion of the Italian trailer to see how the film was sold in its native country. And I think it's important to have that for any Italian Western. But again, even finding surviving trailers is difficult, so it's nice that Indicator was at least able to get a decent looking standard def scope version of the original Italian trailer. And then fascinatingly, we have 5 original US TV spots that survive, and presumably were probably in Sony's vaults. They have been included here. They are presented, it seems like an HD transfer, so again, these probably came from Sony. They are in black and white, obviously in the 1:3 aspect ratio, but it's a nice sort of time capsule for how an Italian Western might be advertised on regular American television in 1967. And of course, it's made to look as basic as possible because it's just little tiny short black and white TV spots, but you could still tell it's an Italian Western, and it's just fascinating to be able to see these. So they very much repeat themselves. They're very short and basically edited down from the original US trailer, but it's just fascinating to look at these as part of the original marketing campaign, and great that they survive and can be looked at in this level of quality. And then of course we conclude the on-disc supplements with the wonderful, very substantial image gallery, as all Indicator discs have with image galleries. They are always very substantial, very extensive, always seeking out higher res photos, and feature a variety of production stills, lobby cards, promotional images, posters, foreign posters, and interestingly, every once in a while you might catch a glimpse of something that looks more like a scene that was cut from a film or an alternate angle. So this is yet another one of Indicator's substantial and very impressive image galleries. It definitely takes you some time to step through all of the images, but it is very much worth it because, again, just as with their books and every aspect of their releases, Indicator takes the time to source better photos and make even their image galleries impressive and substantial and very much worth your time. And then we close with Indicator's brand new improved English subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, which is something that they always take the time to do, and I always want to highlight that because that's something that often gets overlooked and definitely takes time and patience to go and do. And I think it's commendable that Indicator does that on all their releases. But they also did a brand new translation and better rendering of the English subtitles for the Italian version. So when you're watching the Italian version with Italian mono, these are brand new subtitles that Indicator supervised themselves to improve the overall translation. And this also is what you're getting in the hybrid audio presentation of the full Italian version. So when you're getting the switch back and forth between the English and Italian mono, you're also getting the new and improved English subtitles that Indicator made for the Italian translation. So that's another level of quality, care, and attention to detail that Indicator put into this release that you just don't see hardly ever. And that is certainly most appreciated and very much noticed, at least by me, because I pay attention to this stuff. Then, of course, we close out with the limited edition printed materials, the incredible book, the dual-sided poster, that this is the film's UK video premiere. It has never had a release in the UK on any video format before this. Even in the US, it only basically had that previous Blu-ray of the same Sony master, and that's pretty much it. So this is a film that's definitely needed quality treatment for decades and has only finally gotten it on these more modern Blu-ray releases. And of course, this is limited to 5,000 copies, which is now sold out. So when you purchase this edition, you will be getting the standard edition, which will basically be this style of artwork in this case with the 2 discs, but unfortunately you will not have the reversible artwork or any of the beautiful limited edition materials in terms of the case, the poster, and the incredible book as well. So ultimately, the Indicator release of The Big Gundown is an incredibly impressive release of a film that's had a variety of edits over the years, and before the Blu-ray releases has not had a home video release really at all of note in either the US or the UK. And to be able to look at this film in a really good Sony preservation master in multiple different cuts with multiple different audio options, with real effort put into presenting the film as best as possible with the surviving elements in its primary major versions with both English and mono options, and including an incredible supplements package that mixes together pre-existing legacy extras and substantial new extras as well in this beautiful limited edition set, and also the standard edition as well, which has the same incredible disc. This is easily the version of the film to pick up and own. The only thing it misses from the US Blu-rays, I believe that disc does have 1 or 2 additional short interviews that I'd like to pick up that disc for, but I guess they were perhaps not able to license those because unfortunately sometimes that does happen. But outside of that, all of the other legacy extras from that release are ported over here, and I think the new extras as well make this the best overall supplements package and the most comprehensive as well. But it's not like we have a lot to choose from. We basically have the US Blu-ray, the German Blu-ray, and this Indicator release, which is definitely the most stuffed with supplements and versions and audio options and attention to detail. It is by far the best of the 3, and thus the best release the film has ever gotten, and allows you to see the Sony 2K master of the full-length Italian version with either the original Italian mono or this beautiful hybrid mono of the English and Italian mixes, which is done beautifully. This is a phenomenal effort from Indicator and is easily one of the only great Italian Western releases on a modern format in terms of not having any major issues, not having problematic color timing, having substantial and impressive extras, substantial impressive packaging, an incredible book. So I would personally say that even though I haven't seen every single last Italian Western Blu-ray release and UHD release, that of all the ones I've seen and read about, I think that this Indicator release of The Big Gundown is easily among the top 5 Italian Western releases on Blu-ray or UHD. It has been done, I think, to the best of everyone's ability with the elements that are here, and the only way this could be improved is if Sony were to come along and revisit the film in the 4K realm and do a brand new 4K scan and 4K master, as they finally did on the the iconic renowned films, the Bedecker Scott Westerns. So until that ever happens, I think this film has been treated about as well as it possibly can be, and it is finally a release of an Italian Western that I can wholeheartedly recommend as being truly representative of the original experience, both in the US version and the extended full-length Italian version, and having multiple audio options, substantial extras. It's an incredible package. It's another must-own Indicator Blu-ray release, and I strongly encourage anyone who loves Italian Westerns to at least pick up the standard edition, which is currently in print and very affordable. It is a must-own title for a film that has been kicked around for decades and has only seen 3 Blu-ray releases now, and before that had nothing. And this is certainly the most impressive, the most comprehensive, and the best of those 3 Blu-ray releases, and another example of Indicator really knocking it out of the park in terms of their overall efforts and commitment to preserving film culture. So those are my thoughts on the Indicator limited edition release of The Big Gundown. I think it's another absolutely essential Indicator title, and again, one of the agonizingly few essentially perfect releases of an Italian Western without any sort of major problems, and with a substantial supplements package which will really enhance your viewing experience and your overall appreciation of the film itself. So this is a must-own title. This is even an upgrade if you just have the already nice US Blu-ray that uses the same master. This is an upgrade in terms of versions and the hybrid English-Italian option for the Italian cut of the film, and even more fantastic extras than the US release. So this is a fantastic presentation of one of the better or even best Italian Westerns that deserves an even greater reputation than what it has among fans of the genre. So as always, I hope my babblings about Italian Westerns and the sort of adjacent to Leone films in the genre and physical media releases has been at least somewhat fun and informative. I think this is an easy recommendation. It's an absolute must-own, and even though the lovely limited edition has now sold out, I strongly encourage anyone interested to pick up the standard edition, which is very, very affordable and absolutely worth your time. If you love Westerns at all, you need a copy of this Indicator release, because this is an absolutely fantastic presentation of one of the better Italian Westerns. So as always, please do keep supporting both studios and boutique labels by buying films on disc to help keep both physical media and film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. You'll never catch me!